we're looking at mid to late 2030s for missions to Mars. That's a really long way to plan your future ahead. And there are a lot of difficult steps along the way. School is difficult. All types of things are difficult. The things that keep me from giving up on it are that this is something that I'm so passionate about and I love. And I always just think back to that 5-year-old who was staring out at the skies and wondering what was out there. And I know that I can't let her down because she is relying on me to accomplish this.
Hello everyone, welcome to another great episode of Trolling with Logic. I'm your host Nathan Dickey, and with me today is most of the usual crew, and as usual we'll just go around and say how we're doing before we introduce our special guest. How's it going, Cal?
It's going very well. Happy New Year to everyone out there. I know this is kind of going to be out of sync with the rest of the podcast, but Happy New Year to our listeners. Hope you have a good one.
And Jen is here.
Hey, yeah, I'm not doing too bad. Trying to set up a little home lab at the minute, which is proving a little bit of fun. But apart from that, same business as usual.
Awesome. I saw those pictures. That looks pretty cool. And Kitch is here with us, conscious this time, I think.
Yes, somehow. It is Sunday after all.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bring in our special guest for today with a quote. Are we human because we gaze at the stars, or do we gaze at the stars because we are human? And that quote is from Neil Gaiman's book and movie Stardust, and it really encapsulates and defines the ambition and sort of life philosophy of Abigail Harrison, who joins us today on the show. She's known on her blog and other social media as Astronaut Abby. She's a 19-year-old aspiring astronaut and scientist. She's the founder of the Mars Generation, a nonprofit organization with the goal of advancing public interest in human space exploration and advocate for NASA's journey to Mars. In addition to her outreach work, she's also currently attending school at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, studying astrophysics and microbiology. Her goal is to be the first person to set foot on Mars, and she joins us on the show today to talk about why space exploration inspires her and the importance of STEM education among the general public. Welcome to the show, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on and for that nice introduction. I'm excited to get to chat with all of you today.
So are we. Let's kick off our discussion with some of your backstory and how you got to be the advocate for space that you are today.
Yeah, so I've wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. Probably since I was 5 or 6 years old, I've loved this idea of space and of looking up at the stars and imagining what's out there and what we have the potential to discover and explore. And so when I was 13 years old, I ended up setting up a Twitter account and a website where I decided to share my journey towards this goal of becoming an astronaut with people around the world. And over the last 6 years, I have gone about doing that. And by doing so, I realized that there's a lot of potential out there for space exploration to inspire and excite people, and especially young people, to take a part of STEM, to become interested in STEM and to perhaps pursue careers in STEM. And so I ended up getting involved in outreach. I started speaking in schools and visiting classrooms. I've done a lot of writing both through my own website and through other publications, and have amassed a following of over 500,000 people who are joining me for this journey. And then within the last year, I ended up starting a nonprofit, which you mentioned, called the Mars Generation, which the goal of the nonprofit is to excite people about space exploration and STEM education and really create this groundswell of support for space exploration so that it's possible for NASA to advance their journey to Mars within the next couple decades.
Yeah, I just want to come in there, and I think I want to play the bit of the devil's advocate to a complaint I hear a lot whenever space travel is brought up, and that's the old, why should we waste all this money? I mean, I don't believe this myself, but you probably hear it yourself. Why waste all this money on that? It's no benefit to us every day. Why not just focus on fixing things here before we go into space? How do you respond to people like that?
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is a very common misconception that people have about the space program. And my response to that is that space exploration and the work that we've done in the past and the work that we're doing now has such large benefits for society in really every aspect of society that you can imagine, from social to economic and everything in between. Things that you don't even realize are connected to space exploration actually came from space exploration. So everything from the insulation in your house that helps to keep it warm during the winter and cool during the summer, to the camera that's in your phone, which lets you share crystal clear images with your friends around the world, those can all find their roots in space travel. I guarantee that not a single person goes through their day without using, if not more, at least one item that they would consider central to their ease of life that can be traced directly to technology and science developed from space exploration. There are countless statistics that I could inundate you with that show that investing in space exploration has direct and really extreme paybacks in economy, in ease of lifestyle, in scientific and technological advancement, all kinds of things. And then there's also the answer that space exploration has this incredible ability to inspire people to do great things, to show us that our boundaries are not what we once thought they were. We can no longer say that the sky is the limit when there are footprints on the moon. So it really shows us that there is nothing that is too big for us to reach for. There's nothing that should be put into a category of impossible, because we do impossible things every day in space exploration.
Yeah, there's a certain level of cynicism involved in that question when people ask what it's worth and whether we're wasting money or not. And that cynicism is in some ways tied to the loss of curiosity that people go through as they become adults. Space exploration seems like a promising avenue for keeping people interested in STEM throughout their lives, but it doesn't impact everybody as it should as far as awe and inspiration. Do you have any theories about why that kind of natural curiosity goes away and gets replaced with cynicism in a lot of the general public?
Yeah, definitely I do. I think that there is a lot of cynicism involved with the question that you asked, like you mentioned, and there's also a lot of misunderstanding. So as far as the cynicism goes, I would attribute it to the fact that life is hard. And so it's something where it's easy for kids to be excited or inspired by space or be interested in science or STEM. But the older you get and the more of the real world type things that you have to deal with that start to crash down on you, it can be difficult to hold on to those things that you find really interesting. But I would push back and say that there's still that ability for us to change that and to alter that and to continue to guide people into STEM careers, which we know that we need to have more people entering STEM careers if we want to continue to advance our capabilities, by showing them, continuing to show these exciting things that are happening and how interesting it can be. And space travel is one of those areas that, you know, it has that capability to reach out to not everyone, but certainly a lot of people and play that role. I also think that there's a big part of it that's misunderstanding, not just cynicism, but people who don't understand that the money that we spend for space travel, it doesn't just disappear into space. The amount of physical material that we actually send into space is very limited. The majority of the money that is used for space travel, it all goes into industry and infrastructure and business happening here on Earth. And so it's directly impacting our economy in that manner. And it definitely stays here on Earth and continues to feed into the cycle. It doesn't just disappear. So that's a misunderstanding that happens a lot, that people think that we're just wasting money on this, which isn't true.
Has there been any point during your last 6 years since you started this project where you've become either disillusioned or found things incredibly difficult to the point where you've even considered even giving it up for a little while? I know a lot of people like myself, for example, I mean, My past is something that a few people are very, very aware of. And I certainly felt out becoming disillusioned with my personal abilities to do anything in terms of STEM. I'm just wondering if there's anything that's forced you to perhaps rethink the way you approach things over the last 6 years.
Absolutely. I think that it would be unrealistic and untruthful of me to say that there hasn't been a point during these last 6 years with the work that I've been doing that I haven't felt disillusioned, or that things haven't been so difficult to the point that you almost want to give up. And I have a couple of instances that I could talk about with that kind of range the spectrum of difficulty in this field. And one of them is that bureaucracy can be very difficult to deal with. And so that goes both with dealing with international collaboration within government agencies can be a lot to handle and can feel very frustrating at times. And even things like running and starting a nonprofit. There's a lot more involved with that that's not necessarily just the STEM work or the speaking directly to students and stuff like that. It's actually administrative work that's behind the scenes in order to make something like this possible and something like this happen. Sorry, the mailman just came.
It's all right.
I have 2 dogs who love to go crazy when the mailman comes.
Whoa. Welcome to the show, dogs.
That's they always have to make an appearance at some point. The other point at which I would say that I generally have felt somewhat disillusioned is being on this path that is not necessarily a 5 or a 10-year career path, but is a career path that's at least 20 years down the road from when I started. We're looking at mid to late 2030s for missions to Mars. That's a really long way to plan your future ahead, and there are a lot of difficult steps along the way. School is difficult, all types of things are difficult. I do feel the same struggles that I'm sure a lot of students feel in that sense. The things that keep me from giving up on it are that this is something that I'm so passionate about and I love. And I always just think back to that 5-year-old who was staring out at the skies and wondering what was out there. And I know that I can't let her down because she is relying on me to accomplish this. And then I also know that I have this amazing community around the world of people who are constantly cheering me on and saying that this isn't just my dream anymore. This is a dream that they're all a part of. And so even though there are people who, for instance, can't become astronauts because of medical conditions or because of where they live or because they are afraid of heights, they can still partake in this dream and be a part of it because I'm doing it and I'm sharing it with all of them. And so knowing that I have that capability to create this experience for so many people is also really powerful and helps to keep me from giving up when things get hard.
One of the biggest questions that I was asked when we were preparing for this show and trying to get some questions together, especially from my colleagues in work, was it kind of ties into that. It's this idea of having a massive responsibility, but also if you go into space, if you're going to a different planet, if you're doing any kind of space exploration, you are necessarily confined in a very small area for a very long time with people that you have to make sure that you get on with. But not just that, you don't exactly know how that journey is going to go and the challenges that you're going to face. Does that ever scare you? Does it ever frighten you to think about the fact that you're going to be potentially stuck in a very small rocket in a very confined space and it's almost claustrophobic environment for that amount of time? Or do you have a load of coping mechanisms that you're currently developing to enable you to overcome that kind of issue, if that makes sense?
That's such a good question. I love that you're asking that. There are a lot of difficulties with space. There's obviously the physical difficulties of how microgravity affects us. There's difficulties of how we're going to protect astronauts from radiation, all types of things. But the one that you mentioned is one that gets overlooked by a lot of people, but I think is one of the most important, which is social and psychological impact of being in that confined space, and not only being in the confined space, but knowing that you are in every way possible separated from humanity. You are honestly as far out from humanity as it is possible to be. That definitely does take a toll on, or will take a toll on the mental states of the astronauts who embark on a journey like a journey to Mars. And I think that the way that will be overcome is just by having a very rigorous selection process where astronauts selected not only based on their capabilities within science and technology and piloting those types of things, but also based on their ability to withstand difficult mental situations or to be social with the same people for 3 years at a time. And I can't promise that I'm the right person for that, but I can say that based on having lived with me for 19 years, I certainly like to think that I am. I'm a very social person. I'm very much a team player. I have been my entire life, and it's something that I definitely value, that ability to work with others. But I also am someone who doesn't necessarily need interaction with other people. I enjoy interaction with other people, but I also enjoy taking days at a time of solidarity to not have to interact with the outside world, which I think ends up being a good mix for something where you're looking at that kind of a space issue.
I can totally relate to that as well.
Right, just want to cozy up in your house and like not answer the door for
oh yeah
for anything.
I was going to, like I said, we were dealing with some of the cynicism there. Do you think something like, the movie The Martian, that's made a kind of positive impact on the face of space travel and space science, like the public image?
Oh, absolutely. I'm such a big fan of The Martian. I read the book before it was published because Andy Weir was actually publishing it, as I'm sure you're aware, in bits and pieces on his blog. And my dad sent me a link to it at one point and said, Abby, you've got to read this. It's fantastic. I read it. I was like, this is great. And then I was extremely excited when it became such a pop culture phenomenon like it did recently, where it took off as a book and as a movie. And it was really done so well. And I was excited about it because I think that it displays some of the best parts of humanity. When you watch The Martian, you see someone who is in a situation that seems so helpless, and it seems like there's nothing that can be done, and yet he overcomes it, and we as a society do everything in our power to help save that stranded astronaut. And so I think that definitely had a very positive impact on the public opinion or view of space travel and what we're capable of in the future. Another part of The Martian that I enjoyed that was displayed so well was that all of the technology that is shown or talked about in both the book and the movie version of The Martian is technology that either we currently possess or that we're in the process of working towards. So we're creating right now. So it's not something that we have to say, this is 300 years in the future or this is science fiction. No, this is science fact. And so having science fact like that become so culturally popular, it does a lot to dispel myths about STEM and space travel. And that was exciting for me to see people starting to, drink up this reality that was being shown.
Definitely.
And just for me, it wasn't just that it focused on the astronaut. It actually, the whole team, the engineers and the technicians and all that go into making these things work. It was kind of a good advert for, this is the whole effort that goes into these things.
Absolutely. And it showed how, like you said, it's the whole effort. It was not just all of the United States even. It was an international collaboration that ended up making that possible, which is something that, a lot of people don't always consider, because our astronauts, they are the public face of space travel, and they're our stars, and they're the ones who we always hear about and see. But as is shown, it's not possible for him to have survived or returned without the help that he received from thousands and thousands and thousands of people on the ground. And that's the reality of space travel, is that without all of the people, all of the engineers and the physicists and the scientists and the public relations people and the, politicians and everyone who's involved with making space travel and international cooperation and private and public sector relationships in space work, our astronauts, they wouldn't be going anywhere. They'd be grounded. And that's not often seen, but it was portrayed very well in that movie.
It's interesting how in cinema, usually that kind of collaboration requires some sort of earth-ending situation, such as Armageddon or something like that, And it's interesting to see that kind of thing happen for the sake of one person. And like you said, it restores your faith in humanity a little bit. I know it's only a fiction, but that kind of story of trying to save one person who's a pioneer in a different world is quite inspiring. And another thing that I wanted to, because we were talking about technology beforehand, and another question that I had is, how much of an impact do you think virtual reality is going to have on the interaction of human beings who are out in the realms of the cosmos with humanity on Earth? Because I would imagine that the advances in virtual reality would add an extra level of interaction potentially with the environment back home that could be used as kind of a therapeutic device.
Absolutely. And that's one of those fields that, we wouldn't have even been able to realistically imagine the path that virtual reality is going down today. 10 years ago, that wasn't something that we were even thinking about, but now it is. And you have to imagine, what will virtual reality, what will our capabilities with that be in another 10 years or another 15 years or 20 years? And by the time that we are doing these missions in the 2030s, what will we be capable of, and how will that affect that mission? I can't make any solid predictions right now because I don't know what the progression will be, but I fully believe that virtual reality will play a part in our interactions between astronauts and Earth and maintaining that psychological health that is so necessary for social creatures like humans to be able to do something like go to Mars and eventually do even longer term space missions. I think that that's something to keep our eyes on in the future because it will have a big impact.
Okay, Kitch, you've been very quiet.
Yes, I'm just kind of absorbing it all in. I'm really much a space noob, but what really interests me is the search for life outside of Earth. Well, I just want to ask, maybe, where do you think, if we do find life, where would we most likely be willing to find it, or be it, not willing, but likely?
There are a lot of possibilities of where life could be found within our solar system. So if you're talking about finding extraterrestrial life forms within your or my lifetime, it's very likely that will be confined to within our solar system because that's what our current capabilities are as far as space travel goes. As far as that goes, that is still a huge area to cover. And so there are so many different possibilities, everything ranging from we could find life on Mars. It is very possible that life has existed or currently exists, or that the capability is there for life to become prominent on Mars. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we continue to have Mars exploration, and especially human exploration of Mars. We also have so many other options, such as the Jovian moons, Europa, Io, Ganymede, those types of places where it's believed that there might be liquid subsurface oceans. If you've ever heard the theory before that life originally began or occurred within Earth's deep oceans around hydrothermal vents, we can say that it's likely that there is life on one of those Jovian moons that has a subsurface ocean as well, because we know that they also have geological activity, which allows for hydrothermal vents. So all of the necessary materials are there. It's just a matter of us going and checking now. So there's those options. There's also options such as other moons in the far reaches, such as Titan. And then other than that, I mean, there's a lot of possibility for us to find things that we don't even know yet. So the way that we define life or extraterrestrial life is fairly limited right now, in the sense that we have a list of categories that we need to place life into, such as that it needs to breathe, it needs to react to stimulus, it needs to be able to interact with its environment or excrete and input matter, those types of things. Who knows, as we continue to explore farther out in our solar system, that we might find a sentient life form that doesn't necessarily display those capabilities, and we might end up having to reclassify what we consider life to be. So it's really a field that is wide open and brimming with possibilities right now.
And what do you think about the idea of panspermia, where life originated elsewhere in the solar system and was planted on Earth, or the other way around, if life originated on Earth and has been planted on other worlds? For example, on the moon, there could be there's almost certainly microbes that are associated with the devices that we left there. from the moon landing. And yes, we landed there. Let's not get into that. People in the comments section, just going to head that off right now.
I'm glad that disclaimer on there, because it's never fun to deal with that one. I wouldn't rule out the idea of panspermia and the idea of life having originated somewhere else in the universe or in the solar system and having come to Earth, or potentially spreading from Earth either through things such as impacts that throw pieces of Earth out of our atmosphere and into space and then end up in other areas, or things such as human travel, like you mentioned, that could potentially deposit microbes and microbial life elsewhere. I definitely would not say that that's an impossibility. And as far as that goes, there's a lot of research that shows things like extremophiles that we found on Earth can, survive conditions that are relatively similar to space, or the idea of extremophiles that can hibernate for long periods of time in very cold, low pressure environments, things like that, anoxic environments. So the possibility is out there. I would say that the jury is still out on whether or not we can give any credence to that. But once again, that's one of the things that we just need to continue to do more work and more research and explore more and get more firsthand views of what's in our solar system in order to be able to answer questions of where did life come from and what else is out there.
I know for research going on in the field for, or at least for microbes, trying to find extraterrestrial microbes, one of the most important areas is metal reduction. So bacteria using metals such as iron or silver, gold, uranium, that sort of research is important. So that's one area I think that could yield some very interesting results, especially on Mars, because Mars has a iron oxide. Is it on the surface of Mars? That's why it's is responsible for its red color.
Mm-hmm. You're correct. Yeah, so that that definitely is one of the tracers that astronomers and astrobiologists and astrophysicists can use to look for extraterrestrial life forms and to find the evidence of them. Another really useful one that we can look for is carbon cycling, which is tracking the way that carbon is exchanged through an atmosphere or lithosphere, and then trying to make up for discrepancies that we see, because that's one of the ways that you can track life as well. And once again, that's really useful for places like Mars. Other than that, there are a lot of different methods that people go about, astrobiologists and such, to do that. One of the quite common ones is searching for the presence of liquid water, because as of now, we consider liquid water to be a necessary prerequisite for life as we know it. That's not the end-all be-all of that there has to be liquid water in order for us to find extraterrestrial life. That just means that that's a very likely indicator that we have right now. So there are a lot of different methods out there that can be used and are being used to search for extraterrestrial life.
Can I just ask you, do you have a favorite hypothesis in regards to the origin of FRBs?
Of course, aliens.
Is that your favorite, or is that the one that you think is the most likely? Or do you have a favorite non-alien source kind of origin that you favor over others?
I have to say that aliens is my favorite, but it's you're right, it's not the most likely. I just really enjoy being able to be that one kid in class who every time there's something unexplainable that happens, just to look and really seriously say, but aliens.
Definitely a Dyson sphere. It's definitely a Dyson sphere.
As far as realistic hypothesis goes, I definitely am a fan of hydrothermal alkaline deep ocean vents. That is one that I find to be very likely, and that I think there's a lot of evidence emerging now of places like the Lost City, which is a fairly recently discovered hydrothermal vent community that shows us that may have been where life either formed or where life developed into the capability of life as we know it now. There's a process that goes on in hydrothermal vents called serpentization, which is just a type of rock that has a porous material to it. And the reason that that's really important is because this ends up creating a electrochemical gradient with the water that flows through it that could have had the ability to power the first microbes before they had the ability to create their own ATP synthesization. And so I find that to be a very likely place for life to have developed. But once again, it's new stuff comes out every couple of years that completely revolutionizes the field of astrobiology. And it's just a waiting game now to see what we find out.
I see. I think we were talking about two different things here. I think you were talking about abiogenesis or the building blocks before or just after abiogenesis, where I was thinking about fast radio bursts, which have been in the news recently, FRBs. Have you heard of those?
I must have misheard your question.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. So my specialty.
Aliens is valid for both, though.
It is exciting for both. I am not an astrophysics student. I'm an astrobiology student. So anytime I get away talking about astrobiology, I have a tendency to take off with it. I'm afraid that I can't necessarily comment with any authority on FRBs at this moment, just because, as I mentioned, that's not my specialty, and I wouldn't want to say anything that I don't know to be 100% accurate or true to the best of my knowledge.
No worries. Definitely, especially me. I've got a hypothesis about absolutely everything, which is my downfall because I'm always wrong. But hey ho.
Hey, better curious than not, though. So
exactly, that's my excuse, definitely.
Not a bad thing.
Nathan, is it okay? We did get some questions on Twitter this week. Probably get them asked. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I've got them in front of me here. So Ginger Raspus is asking, how old were you when you first discovered space science?
Let's see. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, I have been excited about the idea of space travel and space science ever since I was a little kid. But for a long time, I actually, this is a little bit of an embarrassing story. I wanted to be an astronavigator, probably until I was about 11 or 12 years old, because I was also very much into science fiction growing up. My dad is a huge science fiction nerd, and so I got that from him at a young age, and I read a lot of, futuristic type space travel books and thought that astronavigator was a real career field right now. And as I got older, I realized that it really isn't, and decided to settle for astronaut instead. But I would say that as far as becoming interested in realistic space science and the careers that are available within that, I was probably around 12 at the time when I started to very seriously consider what my future would look like and what fields I would be interested in entering into within that. And so for a long time, I thought that I wanted to be either an aerospace engineer or a physicist of some sort. And then as I got more and more ingrained into school and learning about those types of things, I drifted more into the field of biology and found that that's where my passion lies.
All right, because that it sort of ties into another question that was asked from Jimmet, which is, when you knew you wanted to be an astronaut, who or what inspired you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I knew that I wanted to be an astronaut from a young age. I was inspired by the natural world around me, as well as by science fiction. And then I was also inspired when I was 13 years old, and I had a chance encounter that ended up changing my life in a very significant way. And that's that I was down in Florida watching one of the space shuttle launches, STS-134 Endeavour, the second to last space shuttle. And as I was coming back through the airport on my way home, I ended up bumping into an astronaut who had also been down there watching the launch. And this astronaut was Luca Parmitano with the European Space Agency. And I recognized him, and I went up and I asked him if I could interview him for a school project that I was doing. I was 13 at the time, and he agreed and ended up sitting down with me for about an hour, and we went over everything from, his current job as an astronaut to my dreams and aspirations and what my plan was to get there. And at the end of it, he gave me his email address and said, "I will be your astronaut. If you have any more questions, please email me."
Wow, that's awesome.
It was really fantastic. And he also gave me a lot of great advice. But that ended up developing into a relationship over the next couple of years where he was able to mentor me and just provide a little bit of support while I grew this dream that seemed a little bit impossible, but knowing someone who'd actually done it made it seem a lot more possible. So that was a huge inspiration within my life. And I was extremely fortunate to have had that encounter and for it to have been Luca, who is such a genuine person and is so interested in fostering the next generation of youth to be excited in STEM.
That's awesome. I mean, I had not a similar experience, but I met Michael Foale recently when he was doing a few talks over here with Pint of Science. So I had a chance to have a chat with him and ask him a few questions. And one of the questions that I asked him, because I'm somebody who's gone through a lot of my life with no real ambition, I didn't really have anywhere to go. And I ended up sort of finding myself at a very, very late stage in my life. I thought that I can't really do anything now. I can't really get into the field of physics or anything like that like I really want to. And I said to him, how do you speak to people like myself who feel like they've wasted their life and they've got to this point where they can't do anything? And he said, well, you can spend another 8 years and you can learn online while you're working. And that's almost more impressive. So by the time you're 40, you could have done astrophysics and you could come and work in the space industry. And you'll be seen as, even though you didn't complete school and did all these things in your past, that in itself can actually be a stepping stone to actually getting into the field that you want to go to. So never give up was his basic message. That was very powerful to me as somebody who had basically given up, having the opportunity to speak to him and see him still so passionate and still pushing people forward regardless of where they were in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to hear about encounters like that because I feel very fortunate to have known what I wanted to do for as long as I can remember, and to have passionately been following that career for the last couple years definitely gives me a little bit of a leg up, but it doesn't change the fact that you can always switch what you're doing, or you can, the life that you've been living leads up to something and it will eventually build into something. And it's your prerogative to take what you've done and turn it into what you want. I have a sister who's 2 years older than me, and we are opposite in every way possible. I was a model student in school and she despised high school, all of that. And she is not interested in STEM or science or math, but people always ask, how does that make her feel to have had a sister who, was so passionate and so regimented down this very socially acceptable path of becoming a scientist? And the answer is that she's fine with it because she's doing her own thing. She's out there changing the world in her own way. She travels and works and might end up being a teacher, might end up being a massage therapist, might end up being a poet, might end up being who knows what she'll end up being. But the fact is that it doesn't make her path any less valuable than mine because she doesn't know what it is right now. It's just a different way of going about it.
Okay, so I'm just searching through. There's another question on Twitter there. It's from Winter Bynes. It says, "Dear Abby, are you committed to long-term lonely survival on Mars, or will you be exploring social open-mindedness?"
Not quite sure what to make out of that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Yeah. One that I can take away from that question is that a very common question that I get is, how long will we be sending astronauts to Mars, and is it a one-way mission? And my answer to that is usually that I am highly in support of doing a two-way mission, Mars and back, for a variety of reasons. One being that I don't believe we currently have the technological capability to sustain a reasonable human lifespan on Mars or in space. And I don't think that it is ethical of us to send humans into situations where we know that they won't be surviving even to a fraction of their given potential of life. And I also think that there's no quicker way to kill public support for something like space travel than to have astronauts die in space. Because space travel, It's true. Space travel is something that is so publicized and so romanticized by society that it definitely, a part of it is PR as well. A part of it is, how do we display this to the public? And that means that we can't send humans on suicide missions. We can't do that and maintain high public levels of approval for a space program. So that's one factor. Another factor is that a great portion of the value of sending humans to somewhere like Mars is in returning them so that they can be inspirations and heroes and whatnot to the next generation of aspiring students. When you look at the value that the Apollo missions had, there was very high value in them technologically and scientifically in the advances that we made, but there was an equal value, I would argue, in the way that they inspired students when the Apollo astronauts came back.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to go back to, is the media coverage, because I studied journalism in college, and that's kind of my area. And I've been really critical of the way the news media and reporters have covered science-related topics in the past and in recent history. Do you think that the news media have over-romanticized space travel to the point where the public that they write to doesn't understand the whole scope of the challenges involved, and they just see it as kind of romanticized? Because I know back in the 60s when Apollo 11 was going on, there was a huge popular culture movement kind of galvanizing around it, and that helped garner public support for it. But few people other than the people involved in the mission really grasped the challenges and hardship that they all went through.
Yeah, I think that with journalism, and especially with science journalism, of taking these concepts and ideas that can often be very difficult and can require a lifetime of study by specialists in order to fully understand, and translating that into something which will be understandable and excitable and interesting to the general public who work in different fields is a very difficult task. And it's definitely a double-edged sword that journalists are balancing on, where they need to create this media that is both interesting and exciting and relatable to the general reader, but they also need to not over sensationalize science or space travel, and they need to not ignore the difficulties that are involved and the intricacies and those sorts of things. So that's definitely a difficult position to be in. I wouldn't necessarily say that journalists are failing. I think that they're doing a great job, but that it's something that we need to increase. We need to increase the number of science communicators that we have who are helping to share both the importance of space exploration and STEM and the difficulties that go along with both of those. Because you can't ignore either side. You can't just look at it as if it were a science fiction novel and say, this is great that we're doing this. You need to also be educating the public on why we're doing this and on how we're doing this in order to have that sustained public interest. So I think that that's something that thankfully I hope that we'll start to see more of now that we're doing things that are novel and exciting once again. Things like the private space industry have been garnering a lot of media, and then, travel to Mars is garnering media. And I hope that we'll just see responsible journalism trying to balance those two facets.
On the subject of media stories that have caused quite a stir in the last few years, there was the big story about, which a lot of people have picked up on quite interestingly, about tardigrades. And I don't know whether or not they're your favorite organism or not because of their ability to survive dehydrated in space and then be rehydrated and come back to life again. But stories such as that, where there is quite a sensationalist view of what's going on, i.e. there's this idea that something can live in the vacuum of space, and that seems to be what's reported, but the reality isn't quite that. Are you concerned that it's going to create less trust of science if it's been reported incorrect? Or do you not really have a fear of that? That's something that I have a fear of, I suppose. And a lot of people who are involved with or have spoken with a lot of conspiracy theorists who try and push any kind of narrative that they can do.
I love that you brought that up for a couple of reasons. First, because I do quite like tardigrades. Second, because there are so many sensationalized science stories that break in the media, not all of them space related. I mean, we have tardigrades, we have, it seems like every other week there's a new story breaking about we finally found the cure to cancer.
Oh,
or
yeah.
we know how to live forever now.
Or there's a mysterious signal from space and we don't know what it is, but it might be aliens.
Exactly. Or we found something in a frozen glacier that like has been alive for 50,000 years. And it's like, that's not, all of these headlines that you see that claim things that you think can't be true. You're probably right. They probably can't be true. And that is definitely a misnomer that gets put out to the public in the hopes for readers. And it's disappointing to me to see that happen because, like you said, that does end up creating a distrust of science and scientists by the public, which can make things more difficult. And in general, the public doesn't deserve to be deceived. And I don't think that any of the people who publish those things are necessarily malicious in the way that they portray them. It's merely how the business goes in this very fast-paced society that we live in now. It's, you got to stay relevant. So I think that once again, that's a struggle that we'll have to overcome as we continue to get accustomed to the changes that having a widespread internet has made on our society and those types of things that my generation is struggling with. I would certainly hope that we can begin to have more responsible oversight of journalism in that manner and really be truthful in the way that we portray things. A lot of those sensationalized science stories and space stories are based on grains of truth. And so there is definitely a lot of exciting stuff that's going on in STEM and in space exploration. It's just not necessarily as phenomenal as what it's being written about. And so that is a concern and something that, I do worry about, but I don't think that it will be our biggest concern in the near future.
With a lot of the other things that are going on at the moment, especially over in America, there's a big concern that I know myself and a lot of my friends have about science literacy and trying to encourage people to be a little bit more critical in their thinking, and trying to encourage people to understand the things that they're talking about more than just simply feeding them around in some sort of Chinese whisper. What do you think is the best way of encouraging people to be more science literate? Is it being passionate about the subjects that you're talking about, or is there more that one can do to encourage the kind of critical thinking that's required for properly understanding the kind of requirements of space travel or other scientific endeavors?
I think that the most important thing that we can do right now in order to increase scientific literacy and to dispel some of that, whisper circle that you're talking about is to have science communicators. And so that can be anyone from organizations such as the Mars Generation, which goes out and tries to talk to people and interest people in STEM and science, all the way to space journalists or science journalists who are doing their best to write ethical and responsible work and really take their work and translate that into something that the general public can be involved with. I can't comment on the educational system anywhere else in the world, but I would say that in the United States, I am a huge proponent of the concept of liberal arts education, which, in my opinion, we shouldn't be training scientists and engineers and technologists only in their particular field of expertise. We should be giving them a broad background of other areas as well, including history and literature and culture and writing, so that they have the capability to have this specialized field, but also be able to be communicators to general public or to people who work in other industries of what their field is doing. And I think that is one of the most important things that we can do right now, is to really start incorporating more of that duality in our specialists.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The over-specialization of careers and areas of knowledge has created this environment where even scientists a lot of the time aren't able to talk to each other outside of their field. And that's really had a big impact on creating a barrier between not just the science and the public, but between scientists themselves as well.
Absolutely. Where is the value in your work if you are the only person who can use it or understand it? That's one of the biggest downfallings, I would say, of the STEM fields, is that they have that tendency to become so specialized that it makes it difficult to communicate within fields and within the general public. And it turns great work into meaningless work when it doesn't benefit society in any way.
Or even like, he always seems to come up in our show, but to bring up Vance Crowe again from Monsanto, like the example, like he's the best example of this, where Monsanto didn't engage for years and they fell by the wayside and having this very bad image. It wasn't just people ignored them, they just grew to outright just distrust and hate them, and now they've got to repair that damage. So yeah, it is very important to be on top of the communication aspect from day one, really.
The same with CERN as well. I mean, I went to CERN a couple of years ago. I was amazed with all that they were doing there, and you hear so little about it apart from the odd peep in, like the BBC or CNN will have this little story about it being started up or being slowed down, or they found something. But there's so much more that goes on there that nobody ever hears about. And also, once again, there's this whole distrust of it, even though CERN and the Large Hadron Collider, that complex is where apparently, I've heard different claims, is where the internet began as an in-house project to share, files between themselves in that little compound. So, and also people don't understand that the data there, yes, it might be difficult to understand, but it's basically open source because it's publicly funded. It's available for anyone to have a look at as well, which people don't understand. They think it's all a secret. So, yeah, I worry about communication myself. It's one of my big gripes.
One of the big issues in communication these days, and especially in media, is the attention span of people these days it seems to be much shorter, and our ability to focus on a subject that seems important to us as a society is decreasing. And so something happens in the news, and the only way to get any attention for it is to make it huge and extreme and big. Whereas you have a lot of things like you mentioned, CERN constantly has things that are going on there that are important and that are exciting, but the public will only focus on them for a couple days at a time. And it's this idea that, you can't necessarily gain an understanding of what it is without spending more time than a couple days or a week focused on it before something else snatches away the attention. So that's another thing that we're going to have to figure out how to deal with in the upcoming decades.
Yeah, I was just wanting to know, can you give us a kind of background on the whole Mars Generation project? What is what is this all about exactly, for those that don't know?
Yeah, so the Mars Generation is the nonprofit that I started about a year ago. And the focus of it is to inspire and excite young people and people all over the world about the future of human space exploration and the importance of STEM education. And so we have a couple of different programs that we run. One of them is our Future of Space Outreach program, throughout which we do a lot of our public communication, things like, I speak at schools and Skype with schools all over the world at conferences. We write a lot of public opinion pieces, as well as hosting 2 blog posts, curating media channels, which you can find us on most social medias, both at the Mars Generation and with Astronaut Abby. And then our second program is that we have a Student Space Ambassador program, which is a program designed to help students who are passionate about STEM or space exploration to be change makers and advocates within their own communities, and to feel empowered to both go out and do outreach work to help improve scientific literacy or whatnot on their own in whatever way is most available or comfortable to them, and then also to hopefully support them as they reach for these STEM careers as they go forwards in their lives. And our third program is our Space Camp Scholarship Program, where we send 10 students from underprivileged families to Space Camp, which is in Huntsville, Alabama, USA, on full paid scholarships, including transportation and stipend, to hopefully give them an experience that will help to impact their futures in a significant and positive way. And part of that is that they have to present to us some way that they're going to share that experience with their community upon returning home, so that by taking 10 students to space camp, we can in essence affect thousands of people, because if each student shares this experience that they had with 100 people within their community, that's 1,000 people every year whose lives are being changed, hopefully for the better, and who are hopefully becoming more open and involved with STEM, and thereby decreasing some of this stigma that surrounds STEM fields, or this concern of, that's not for me. No, it can be for everyone, and we want to make that apparent. So if anyone who's out there is listening is interested in learning more about the Mars generation, you can visit us at themarsgeneration.org. And like I mentioned, also on a lot of social media platforms such as Facebook or Twitter under the name The Mars Generation.
That's excellent. So yeah, if you're human, you have the ability, so reach for the stars.
Exactly.
That was the Twitter questions of the week, so thanks everyone on Twitter for that.
I enjoy that you guys do the Twitter portion where you involve your audience.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's very important to, be talking about the things that they're interested in learning about, and to really show that you value the thoughts and opinions that they have as well.
You've spoken kind of about the more educational demands on becoming an astronaut. Can you give us what about the physical standards and all that you have to meet? Are they quite high? Like most folk imagine that they are.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about at least the astronaut program in the United States, NASA's Astronaut Corps, is that the actual requirements that are posted under the job listing to become an astronaut are pretty low. So to apply to become an astronaut, you have to have a 4-year degree in a related field, so somewhere within STEM. You have to have 3 years of experience working in your field. And then there are a couple physical requirements, like you have to have either 20/20 vision or vision correctable to 20/20. You have to be able to, I want to say, like swim a 50-foot or 50-meter pool or something. And then you have to be able to pass what's called a flight physical. So it's just a physical examination that pilots go through that checks that you're in generally decent health conditions. So those are the basic requirements that, you need to apply. But the realistic requirements to become an astronaut are much higher than that. Yeah. And that's because there's such a small percentage of the people who apply to become astronauts who actually end up making it, that NASA is able to take their hand-selected pick, their cream of the crop of the people who apply. When you have 8,000 people applying and you only have 8 jobs open, and that number of people applying just increases every year, you really end up being selective. And so you start to notice that a lot of the astronauts who are chosen, they have, if not more, at least one PhD, and they are outstanding within their field as far as academically goes. And then they are also very physically outstanding. So you'll see a lot of astronauts who are marathoners or triathletes or just in general in very, very good physical condition. So I would say that that's something that's important and not to be discounted. That the physical side is important.
Yeah, because I imagine the physical demands of being in space are just phenomenal as well.
Absolutely. You're subjecting your body to conditions which the human body has not evolved to be exposed to. And so in doing so, it really can put a significant toll on your body. And astronauts generally are found to be people who have the mental strength, I guess you would say, also of being extreme athletes. People, it takes a lot more than physical strength to run a marathon.
Yeah.
That's a very mentally arduous process that you have to be very regimented and very strict in your training to do something like that. And so it shows not only physical capability, but also the mental capability to make it through something like that.
Do you find the necessary elitism quite daunting and intimidating, or do you find it very motivational, or is it a bit of both?
I think I find it mostly motivational. I find it to be something to reach towards and something to push me and others to be their very best self that they can be. I think that it would be silly to say that anyone is ever perfect. Astronauts, they're not perfect. There are plenty of astronauts who, they may be able to run a marathon, but even they'll tell you that it wasn't easy along the way and that they ran into a lot of issues. And so I think that it's definitely inspiring to have that paragon of success there.
Yeah, and just kind of one in Europe, what are you making of like what Europe is doing space-wise? Because I see like NASA, like you've got like a huge financial advantage. I'm always quite impressed with what we're managing to do in Europe on like a fraction of what the money that you guys have. Do you view it the same way there?
I definitely do. I think that the European Space Agency and especially the manner in which it works as a collaboration of nations is really fascinating and probably a model that the United States could do to take a look at and probably take a couple hints from on how to economically do space exploration. Because like you mentioned, on a fraction of the budget, you guys are still competitively in the running. That's one of the space agencies that when you look at future missions to Mars, which I fully believe will be an international collaborative effort because no one nation will be able to successfully fund and put together a mission of the granditude that going to Mars would be.
Well, if we can land on a comet, I reckon ESA could sort it out for Mars as well if NASA fails. So.
Right. No, and that's the thing is that I think that, ESA has this background of showing us that you're very capable and hopefully a country that NASA can work with in the future in order to accomplish those bigger goals, to pair the two sides of both of those programs together.
World cooperation would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Everybody together, China, Russia, Europe, America, everybody just getting together, making a massive spaceship. Lots and lots of arboretums inside it, like something out of a 70s sci-fi. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? Amazing. Amazing.
Absolutely.
That actually leads me on to a little question that I had at the back of my mind, but I'd completely forgotten about, which is artificial gravity. I know that's quite a big one. It's probably not your field of expertise, but have you heard of anyone within your university or anywhere else having a realistic theory for artificial, not necessarily gravity, but some form of some method by which to actually keep people at or near kind of 1G on a long space mission, such as going to Mars?
Yeah, so not necessarily within my university because I go to a relatively small undergraduate only university, but I definitely think that artificial gravity is it's one of those fields that for a long time it was considered as a science fiction piece that, thinking about it realistically, like that's silly. But in my opinion, it's something that is not silly. It's necessary. We can definitely do missions to Mars without artificial gravity. We face a lot of physical hardships that we'll have to use workarounds to get through, such as there was within the last couple of years, the big one that's come out is the fact that astronauts' eyeballs tend to change shape when they are in zero gravity for a significant period of time. And that can start to cause discomfort and even blindness because your eyeball is in a shape that that your skull is not intended to hold. And so it presses in places that start to cut off some of the optical nerves and really is just a bad situation. And so there are a lot of people who are currently working on ways to fix that. There are various types of goggles that are being engineered or things like that. And so we can do these still relatively short on the scale of things missions such as going to Mars and back, which will take us, maybe 3 years. But if we want to go farther than that, if we want to continue to have a presence within our solar system and someday farther, artificial gravity is where it's at. Like that is one of the things that we need to overcome in order to be what you'd call a spacefaring nation. So I think that there's a lot of work going on right now in it, and can't necessarily point you to any particular theory that's being evolved because there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
But I would say that keep an eye out for it within the next couple of years because that's something that will only get bigger and more real. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that come to actuality within our lifetimes.
That'd be awesome. I quite like the micro singularity idea with the kind of spaceball spaceship, where you've got a micro singularity in the middle and it creates a 1G field. I quite like that, but yeah, it's bizarre to think about, isn't it? All these different ideas are quite bizarre. One other one that I've heard of is continuous acceleration, which creates a continuous force backwards, which is quite an interesting one, but that would mean continuous deceleration at the other end. So you'd basically switch what it was your walking surface or something like that.
That's where a lot of the issues come in, is that, you get these trade-offs when you try and mess with the laws of nature that we have to work around. I am a big fan of, and this might be the science fiction nerd in me coming out, the idea that's been around for a very long time, back from the 1800s sci-fi that was written, which it's the really basic concept of just having a wheel-shaped spaceship that is benefiting from centrifugal effect to produce that outwards force that can cause the appearance of gravity. And
it has to be huge, though, doesn't it? Because otherwise you end up with a different rotational speed for your head as your feet, and you keep falling over. So the idea is that you have to have a massive wheel to be able to do that.
Exactly, and that's where, once again, you run into that fact of we're messing with the laws of physics, and have to have the other side of that. There is a payback there. And it's not something that we're necessarily capable of right now, but who's to say that in 40 years we won't have a massive orbiting wheel in space that's large enough to create that? Who knows?
We'll find out. Maybe you'll be on the first ship with just such a device in sort of 10, 15 years time. We'll see.
I would certainly love that. That
would be awesome.
Dream come true, I would imagine, for a lot of people here on Earth, myself included.
So am I right in thinking that artificial gravity is almost like a necessity for going to Mars? It would be needed in some capacity.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a necessity for going to Mars. I would say that Mars is still within a reasonable distance and time span from Earth that we could accomplish missions to Mars without artificial gravity, especially considering the fact that the time that astronauts spend on Mars, they will have gravity. They'll have 1/3 of the gravity approximately that we experience here on Earth. So the concept is that for a mission to Mars, our current estimates are 6 to 8 months of travel time in each direction. And once again, within the next 10 to 15 years before we start to actually create these missions to Mars, who knows what type of technology could be developed to shorten that time. But that's not such an outlandish time span to look at, to say, 12 to 16 months in space. We already have astronauts who have lived 12 months in space. There are Russian cosmonauts, and there's just recently Commander Kelly who did that for NASA. So it's certainly not out of the picture. If we want to do longer term missions or really anything much farther than Mars, that's when it becomes a necessity.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and thanks especially to our guest, Abigail Harrison, for taking the time out to talk to us. It was great having you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I have to say that it was a pleasure to get to flesh out some of these ideas with you, and my mind is still buzzing, like, who can I go talk to now about the future of space?
Right. Cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Our next show will be with Matthew O'Neill, who writes about end-of-life related topics. We'll talk about the science behind what happens when we die and whether science has anything to say about an afterlife or not. And we'll explore those issues on our next show.
I just want to very quickly say a big thank you to our patrons for supporting the show. That's the Society for the Advancement of Science. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but his name's Josh. His name will be in the description. Please go look at his channel. Thank you for the help. And also to Microbloganism, who I'm sure listeners will be well aware of. Go check out their channels, and a big thank you to you guys again for supporting the show the way you do.
Thank you very much, Abby.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you for coming along.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. So goodbye, everybody. Have a good weekend, whatever's left of it, and I'll see you later.
Right, bye.
See you later, guys.
camera that's in your phone, which lets you share crystal clear images with your friends around the world, those can all find their roots in space travel. I guarantee that not a single person goes through their day without using, if not more, at least one item that they would consider central to their ease of life that can be traced directly to technology and science developed from space exploration. There are countless statistics that I could inundate you with that show that investing in space exploration has direct and really extreme paybacks in economy, in ease of lifestyle, in scientific and technological advancement, all kinds of things. And then there's also the answer that space exploration has this incredible ability to inspire people to do great things, to show us that our boundaries are not what we once thought they were. We can no longer say that the sky is the limit when there are footprints on the moon. So it really shows us that there is nothing that is too big for us to reach for. There's nothing that should be put into a category of impossible, because we do impossible things every day in space exploration.
Yeah, there's a certain level of cynicism involved in that question when people ask what it's worth and whether we're wasting money or not. And that cynicism...
From that same business as usual?
Awesome. I saw those pictures. That looks pretty cool. And Kitch is here with us, conscious this time, I think.
Yes, somehow. It is Sunday after all.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bring in our special guest for today with a quote. Are we human because we gaze at the stars, or do we gaze at the stars because we are human? And that quote is from Neil Gaiman's book and movie Stardust, and it really encapsulates and defines the ambition and sort of life philosophy of Abigail Harrison, who joins us today on the show. She's known on her blog and other social media as Astronaut Abby. She's a 19-year-old aspiring astronaut and scientist. She's the founder of the Mars Generation, a nonprofit organization with the goal of advancing public interest in human space exploration and advocate for NASA's journey to Mars. In addition to her outreach work, she's also currently attending school at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, studying astrophysics and microbiology. Her goal is to be the first person to set foot on Mars, and she joins us on the show today to talk about why space exploration inspires her and the importance of STEM education among the general public.
Mars Generation, which the goal of the nonprofit is to excite people about space exploration and STEM education and really create this groundswell of support for space exploration so that it's possible for NASA to advance their journey to Mars within the next couple decades.
Yeah, I just want to come in there, and I think I want to play the bit of the devil's advocate to a complaint I hear a lot whenever space travel is brought up, and that's the old, why should we waste all this money? I mean, I don't believe this myself, but you probably hear it yourself. Why waste all this money on that? It's no benefit to us every day. Why not just focus on fixing things here before we go into space? How do you respond to people like that?
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is a very common misconception that people have about the space program. And my response to that is that space exploration and the work that we've done in the past and the work that we're doing now has such large benefits for society in really every aspect of society that you can imagine, from social to economic and everything in between. Things that you don't even realize are connected to space exploration actually came from space exploration. So everything from the insulation in your house that helps to keep it warm during the winter and cool during the summer, to the we're looking at mid to late 2030s for missions to Mars. That's a really long way to plan your future ahead, and there are a lot of difficult steps along the way. School is difficult, all types of things are difficult. The things that keep me from giving up on it are that this is something that I'm so passionate about and I love. And I always just think back to that 5-year-old who was staring out at the skies and wondering what was out there. And I know that I can't let her down, because she is relying on me to accomplish this.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of Trolling with Logic. I'm your host, Nathan Dickey, and with me today is most of the usual crew. And as usual, we'll just go around and say how we're doing before we introduce our special guest. How's it going, Cal?
It's going very well. Happy New Year to everyone out there. I know this is kind of going to be out of sync with the rest of the podcast, but Happy New Year to our listeners. Hope you have a good one.
And Jen is here.
Hey, yeah, I'm not doing too bad. Trying to set up a little home lab at the minute, which is proving a little bit of fun. But apart from
Welcome to the show, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on and for that nice introduction. I'm excited to get to chat with all of you today.
So are we. Let's kick off our discussion with some of your backstory and how you got to be the advocate for space that you are today.
Yeah, so I've wanted to be an astronaut for as long as I can remember. Probably since I was 5 or 6 years old, I've loved this idea of space and of looking up at the stars and imagining what's out there and what we have the potential to discover and explore. And so when I was 13 years old, I ended up setting up a Twitter account and a website where I decided to share my journey towards this goal of becoming an astronaut with people around the world. And over the last 6 years, I have gone about doing that. And by doing so, I realized that there's a lot of potential out there for space exploration to inspire and excite people, and especially young people, to take a part of STEM, to become interested in STEM and to perhaps pursue careers in STEM. And so I ended up getting involved in outreach. I started speaking in schools and visiting classrooms. I've done a lot of writing both through my own website and through other publications, and have amassed a following of over 500,000 people who are joining me for this journey. And then within the last year, I ended up starting a nonprofit, which you mentioned, called the